6 stories up, an ordinary morning at a senior's home is shattered by a crack so loud it echoes across the city. Around the world, cranes lift our future skyward. Yet every year, dozens fall, killing without warning. When giants fall isn't just a story of machines, but of the overlooked failures that bring entire buildings and lives crashing down. From hidden fatigue in decades-old steel to missed warnings and corners cut under pressure, the deadliest crane collapses follow a pattern that regulators never seem to catch in time. If cranes build our cities, why are so many allowed to become ticking time bombs? The answer begins with one snap in Toronto, and a truth the industry can't afford to ignore. At 9:01 a.m., a sound like a gunshot tore through the morning calm above Dufferin and Steeles. In the operator's cab, Ivan Medvedev felt the floor shudder beneath his boots. A sharp metallic crack gave way to a chorus of groans, steel under strain, bolts shearing in a chain reaction. The Pecco hammerhead crane, nearly 3 decades old, was lifting nothing heavier than its own shadow. Yet inside the core of its tower, the Slew ring bolts, those critical fasteners binding the massive upper works to the mast, had reached their breaking point. One by one, micro cracks invisible to the eye had grown, each cycle of stress pushing the metal closer to failure. Medvedev's hands shot for the radio. His voice, clipped and urgent, called out a warning. Something's wrong. Something's really wrong. But the collapse was already in motion. As the bolts snapped, the entire superstructure lurched sideways. Gravity took hold. The cab, boom, and machinery deck plunged as a unit, slamming through the air in a sickening arc. The operator's compartment smashed into brick and concrete, wedged between the 3rd and 4th floors of the senior's residence. For a few seconds, the world hung silent except for the groaning of twisted steel and the hiss of dust settling. Pinned in the cab, Medvedev's mind raced through every possibility. Escape, rescue, final words. He would later recall the weightlessness, the sense of time stretching thin, and the certainty that the end had arrived. But the structure held, just barely. Emergency crews rushed to the scene, sirens echoing against the fractured building. Inside, Medvedev clung to consciousness, battered but alive, as first responders worked to cut him free. Outside, residents stared up at the impossible sight. A crane's heart torn open, its operator suspended between floors. The line between life and death measured in inches of steel and seconds of luck. When the dust settled, Ivan Medvedev remained trapped in a cage of twisted steel, his fate hanging by a thread. Toronto's emergency crews worked against time, cutting through wreckage to reach him. The sound of saws and the shouts of firefighters echoed up the fractured brickwork. Medvedev, battered and bloodied, survived the 90-minute ordeal. Physically, he would recover. Psychologically, the scars ran deeper. He later described the sensation as being suspended between worlds, alive by inches, haunted by the memory of groaning metal and the knowledge that luck, not design, had spared him. Outside, investigators from the Ontario Ministry of Labour arrived before the last ambulance pulled away. They pored over fragments of sheared bolts and maintenance logs, searching for answers. The technical story was clear. The Slew ring bolts, fatigued by decades of use, had finally failed. But when it came to accountability, the trail grew cold. The site's contract contained a covenant to insure, a clause that shifted the financial burden for property damage onto insurers, not the builders or crane owners. In practice, this meant no one could be held directly responsible in court. The losses were absorbed by insurance companies, and the contractors walked away without a formal finding of fault. Legal filings revealed a tangle of arbitration between subcontractors and insurers, each arguing over the fine print. But for the public, the result was silence. No criminal charges, no public reckoning. Medvedev, left with trauma and survivor's guilt, found himself speaking out in union meetings and engineering forums, calling for stricter retirement ages on cranes and real mental health support for operators. His voice joined a small chorus demanding change, but the underlying system remained intact. As long as insurance could cushion the blow, real reform seemed distant. The lesson was stark. When financial risk is rerouted and blame is blurred, safety becomes a matter of luck, not policy. In the shadow of the fallen crane, the city's appetite for answers faded, but for those who lived through it, the questions never left. 3 years before the collapse at Dufferin and Steele's, a factory bulletin from Piner's engineering division landed in the inboxes of crane owners and site managers across North America. The memo carried a blunt warning. High-stress fatigue had been detected in slew ring bolts on several aging hammerhead cranes, including models still in daily use. The advisory called for urgent inspection, replacement of suspect bolts, and strict adherence to torque specifications. Yet, in maintenance logs and contractor correspondence from the Toronto site, no record appears of a comprehensive response. Emails between subcontractors and the crane rental firm show a familiar pattern. Requests for downtime met with deferral, bolt orders marked as non-urgent, and the assumption that another week or month of service would do no harm. Internal memos, later obtained by investigators, reveal a chain of rationalizations. The crane was booked solid through winter, with no margin for extended repairs. Site management weighed the cost of a full teardown against the pressure to keep the schedule on track. In one exchange, a supervisor wrote, "Let's monitor for noise or play. Hold off unless we see real movement." The risk was abstract, the warning easy to sideline. The factory's alert faded into the background noise of a busy job site. When the bolts finally let go, the paper trail told a clear story. The warning had not been lost. It had simply been ignored. The collapse was not a freak event. It was the endpoint of a decision-making process that treated safety advisories as optional and maintenance as a matter of convenience. The price was nearly paid in blood. In the aftermath of the Battersea collapse, regulators faced public outrage and a hard reckoning with the limits of their oversight. The health and safety executive issued an urgent directive. Every tower crane in the country would require immediate, independent inspection of its slew ring bolts. The mandate was clear. Routine checks by in-house crews or affiliated contractors were no longer enough. Only a competent examiner with no commercial ties to the crane's owner or operator could sign off on the most critical connections in the structure. For the first time, inspection reports had to declare both the inspector's qualifications and their organizational independence, with documentation filed beyond the job site and into national records. The reforms didn't stop at inspection. A temporary register required every tower crane operating on a UK construction site to be logged with the authorities, including proof of recent independent examination. This move, though short-lived, drove home a new expectation. The system could no longer inspect itself in the shadows. Even as trade groups bristled at the added costs and tighter scrutiny, the principle took hold. Objectivity and transparency now stood between a city's skyline and disaster. These changes did not erase the loss at Battersea, but they redrew the line between risk and responsibility. From that point forward, the burden shifted. If a crane failed, it would not be for lack of warning or oversight. The lesson was written into law. Real reform only arrives after tragedy forces the issue. On a gray Saturday in Seattle, a tower crane loomed over Fairview Avenue, its steel frame dissecting the sky above the Google campus. Crews moved fast, too fast. In the rush to clear the site before Monday, standard procedure unraveled. Manufacturer guidelines demanded that pins, the heavy steel rods locking each segment together, be removed one section at a time, only after an assist crane had anchored the piece above. But more than 50 pins were pulled well before the upper mast was secured. The crane, now held together by little more than hope and habit, stood fatally exposed. A spring gust, nothing out of the ordinary for the city, swept through the corridor. With so many pins gone, the structure had lost its backbone. The wind found weakness, and in seconds, the crane buckled. 4 lives ended in the chaos that followed. 2 ironworkers on the rig, a college student driving below, and a city official caught in the wrong place at the wrong moment. Cars crumpled beneath falling steel. The aftermath was a scene of twisted metal and disbelief. Internal texts later revealed the pressure. Finish early, clear the street, keep the client happy. Warnings about the dangers of premature pin removal went unheeded, buried under the weight of deadlines. The official teardown sequence was not a suggestion. It was a safeguard built from the memory of past disasters. Here, that memory was ignored. The shortcut saved hours, at the cost of 4 lives. The lesson was written in the wreckage. When safety protocols are treated as obstacles, the margin for error disappears. Sarah Wong's parents spent the days after the Seattle collapse in a haze of grief and disbelief. Their daughter, a 19-year-old college student, had been driving home from campus when the crane fell. In the weeks that followed, the Wong family joined the other bereaved, standing before city council members and television cameras, demanding that no other family endure the same loss. Their words were clear. Shortcuts and pressure to finish jobs faster had left a city exposed, and their daughter paid the price. Families of the victims filed lawsuits against the companies involved, alleging that negligence and disregard for safety protocols had cost 4 lives. The legal battles played out in courtrooms and news headlines, but for the families, the fight was always personal. They spoke at public hearings, urging lawmakers to close loopholes in crane disassembly rules and to require independent oversight on every major site. Their testimony fueled draft bills in the Washington state legislature, including Senate Bill 5251, which called for stricter review of crane dismantling plans and tougher penalties for violations. Although the bill stalled, their persistence kept the issue alive. Petitions circulated, and city officials responded with new local rules, mandating independent inspectors during crane takedowns. The Wongs, along with others, became the public face of a movement that refused to let the tragedy fade into the background. Each interview, each hearing, was a reminder. Behind every statistic is a family whose world was changed in a moment. Their campaign did not bring Sarah back, but it gave her story a purpose, pressing a city and an industry to do better. September 11, 2015 brought a sandstorm to Mecca, just days before the Hajj. The Grand Mosque was filled with thousands of pilgrims, families, elders, children, gathered from every corner of the world. High above them, the Liebherr LR 11350 crawler crane stood silent, its massive boom fixed at nearly 85 degrees. Instead of being lowered and secured, the boom jutted skyward, a steel monument exposed to the winds. Forecasts had warned of gusts exceeding safe operating limits. Crew logs from the preceding week show that meteorologists flagged the risk, but the urgency of the construction schedule left little room for caution. The crane was left ready for lift at dawn, despite the threat in the sky. As the storm swept into the city, the wind found its target. The raised boom, nearly vertical, acted less like a tool and more like a sail. It caught the full force of the gusts, transferring a load that the base and tracks could not resist. In seconds, the crane's superstructure twisted. The main boom, hundreds of feet long and weighing as much as a passenger jet, began to tip. Pilgrims below heard a roar, metal groaning, bolts snapping, the sudden thunder of collapse. The boom crashed through the roof of the side gallery, slicing into the place where worshippers walked between rituals. Concrete shattered, glass exploded, and bodies were thrown in every direction. The aftermath was chaos. First responders waded into dust and debris, searching for survivors. The final count was staggering: 111 dead, 394 injured. Dozens of nations lost sons and daughters that day. For many, the Grand Mosque was a place of hope and redemption. In an instant, it became a scene of loss. The world's largest crane had become an instrument of tragedy. In the silence that followed, the only question left was how such a failure could happen in a place so sacred, on a day meant for prayer. Across continents and decades, the same pattern repeats. Warnings given, lessons ignored, and penalties that rarely match the scale of the loss. In Toronto, liability vanished into a maze of insurance clauses, leaving no one in the dock and no public reckoning for a near-fatal collapse. In London, it took the deaths at Battersea for regulators to demand truly independent inspections, an expectation that only arrived after families demanded answers in open court. Even then, reforms were temporary, and industry resistance soon chipped away at transparency. Seattle's tragedy exposed another blind spot. Here, the pressure to meet deadlines and reduce costs turned safety protocols into obstacles, not obligations. The shortcut that killed 4 people was not an isolated act of recklessness, but an accepted workaround, one that had succeeded countless times before. When tragedy struck, the official response was measured in local ordinances and draft bills, not in sweeping national reform. Lawsuits settled quietly, companies denied wrongdoing, and the root causes faded from the headlines. In Mecca, the calculus was different, but the outcome familiar. The Bin Laden group lost contracts and faced public scrutiny, but no criminal charges or formal fines were imposed. Compensation for victims came by royal decree, not by court order. Internal documents reveal a balancing act between public outrage and the economic weight of a national contractor. The official inquiry cited extreme weather, sidestepping the deeper question: why was the crane left exposed when warnings had been clear? Each collapse reveals an industry shaped by convenience, cost, and the normalization of risk. Regulators act only after disaster, and even then, enforcement is often short-lived or watered down by commercial interests. Fines, when they arrive, are dwarfed by project budgets. Families and survivors are left to advocate for change, but the machinery of accountability grinds slowly, if it moves at all. The result is a culture where shortcuts persist. Oversight is reactive, and the price of inaction is measured in lives lost and communities shaken. Between 2011 and 2017, the United States alone recorded an average of 42 crane-related deaths each year. The Toronto 2009 collapse exposed how aging equipment and inspection gaps can turn routine days into disaster. Battersea's 2006 tragedy showed that industry warnings were ignored until lives were lost. In Seattle 2019, over 50 pins were removed too soon, leading to 4 deaths. Evidence of speed trumping safety. The Mecca 2015 collapse, with 111 fatalities, proved that even the world's most advanced machines are vulnerable when weather warnings and standard procedures are dismissed. Yet, financial penalties and regulatory changes often follow only after tragedy. Many internal safety reports and liability findings remain undisclosed, leaving families and experts with unanswered questions about true accountability. As cities continue to rise, the documented record is clear. When human error and weak oversight meet powerful machines, the cost can be measured in lives. Preventing the next collapse demands learning from every documented failure before history repeats itself.